today we are talking to a very famous guy again, and the special thing about him is compared to other people that we've talked to, there's only one word to mention to describe what he's doing, and this is the word Tetris. So we are talking today to Alexei Pechitnov, and hello.
Hello.
Nice to have you here now. So would you describe a bit about who you are? Because most people just know your name from the credits page from Tetris and nothing else.
Well, that's true. The Tetris is the most known of my names. I used to be a programmer and software researcher. My hobby was to program the games, and Tetris was one of them of my games almost 30 years ago. That's what the time when I created. And after that, I became kind of game designer, and I work on games for almost 30 years already. And I published about 12 other titles, but but still, the Tetris still is the most well known.
If I remember correctly, you started Tetris in 1984.
I worked that time in Computer Center of Academy of Science of USSR. That was that country called USSR that time.
Also the Soviet Union.
Soviet Union, yes.
So, what was the reason actually to start making a game? I mean, um, Russia was not really known for game at that time, and Tetris is actually the game that is connected to Russia.
Well, uh, well, all my life I like all kind of puzzles and riddles and all the mathematical kind of amusement stuff. I start loving this stuff when I was a boy, when I was a schoolboy, and that's why I pick my career in mathematics. So I graduate the Moscow Institute of Aviation as applied mathematician and programmer. And I start working at the computer center as a researcher. So my children's hobby, my child hobby, kind of grow up into profession. But I still get very addicted to all kind of small amusements, riddles, puzzles, and other stuff. So my job at computer center was related to many different hardware of that time. So that's why I need to check hardware whether it's suitable for certain type of the task of the jobs. And the best way to figure out how the hardware works, how the computer works, is to write down the small program, run it, and see how it works. And the game is a very good kind of task for that. It suits very well for that stuff. So I use this excuse to amuse myself with my favorite games, and and I wrote several games there, and Tetris was one of them.
So it was actually not meant to be a game per se, but the task was to make a test program to see if the hardware works.
It was excuse actually, but the main reason I wrote Tetris and some other games is just for fun.
You say um, it's about your your love for puzzles. So what kind of puzzle is the Tetris game based on?
The well, Tetris. So Tetris starts very strange way. It's a very well-known puzzles called Pentamina. I think I could maybe show it to you just a second.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I have it with me as a memory. So that's Pentamina puzzles.
Great.
Just a small box filled with the plastic pieces, and I will take away those pieces now and try to show you it on camera.
Great.
Just a second. Yeah, you see it on the paper here. So this is all kind of. Do you see it?
Yes, perfect. Perfect
Uh,
picture.
Okay. So those are all different shape which could make out of 5 squares. I will put it back.
Great.
No. Yeah, so they are all very different. So this is L piece, this is X piece, this is obviously T piece, and you kind of play with them, and I don't know. I will try to put together something. So you could like with origami pieces, you could create different shapes out of them and play with them and solve small puzzles. But the main puzzles is put it back in in the box. And people spend maybe 3-4 hours before they figure out how to do it. It's really a hard task to do it. And I was in love with this puzzle since I was boy. And one day I think that it's very good thing to create the board game for 2 players using this set of pieces. And maybe people put the pieces in turns, and who couldn't put the last pieces is losing. So something like that. But I didn't think about all the rules very carefully. I just start programming this stuff.
But I see you didn't use all figures. You just used some of them.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So basically, I had the that time I was on computer called Electronica 60. It was a Russian clone of PDP-11 machine, and in '84 I don't have any graphics on this machine. So we used in order to use the machine, we used so-called monitors. It was a kind of TV sets, which was programmed to show just alphanumeric symbols. So I have just, I don't know, 24 strings with 80 symbols in each string. And that was the only device, the only visual device in my disposal that time.
So you actually used a char set.
Exactly. So I need to use symbols to create this geometrical shape. So in order to put the small square, I use the square brackets. So open and close together. They in the string in the line. It looks like square. So for square. So I start programming this stuff. It was not very. It wasn't very difficult, but it was kind of small challenge to arrange all the graphics on the alphanumeric screen. You know. So the price. So I start put together all the procedure to choose the piece, to put it on some kind of field, to flip it, to rotate it, and so on. And when I wrote the rotation procedure to rotate it 90 degrees, it looks so funny when I push the button and it just click, 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 and rotates. So I love it very much, and at this time the idea of real-time game came to me. So I decide why should I place it? Maybe they will just float and I will operate them while they go go to their kind of location. So that was the idea when Tetris was born. But you see, there are kind of very many pieces, 12 different pieces in Pentomina, and that was too much for me because I realized that it will be very hard to remember and to operate with such a big variety of pieces. So I decided that for real-time game it is a reason to kind of shrink the set. And if we try to take the pieces, all the shapes made out of not 5 but 4 square, it will be a very nice set of tetraminos. They call penta means 5, tetra means 4 in Greece. So somehow mathematicians like to give the Greek names for their objects, you know. So
another problem would be actually if you were including all pieces that you wouldn't be able to make a line.
Yeah, so about the line, that was the other story. I didn't think about the line this time. I was still in my set stuff. So with tetraminos, if you don't flip them, there are seven different shapes, which is very famous now. Everybody know them. Yeah, so I decided that 7 is very good magic number, and I love it, and I will stay with it. Then I keep programming this stuff, and all of a sudden I see on the screen my pieces, which I could kind of move left and right, and I could rotate them, and I could place them. But all of a sudden, all the screen is filled up, and I don't know, is in a minute. It's not enough space to really play the game, you know. And I didn't know what to do. To make a very deep scroll, I tried it, but it didn't work because you need to memorize something, and intensive use of memory is not good for games, as we know, you know. So then I noticed that if you fill up entire line, it's kind of dead. You can't do anything with it. So it just occupies the place on the screen. So why I just don't get rid of them and have more space to play? So that was the reason for line collapsing.
Interesting. So you actually try to make a scrolling like a pinball game or something.
Yeah, but it didn't work. Somehow I didn't like how it works, and so I decided to take away the lines and give the score for it.
So actually, the way you made the gameplay was to make things easier. This is how you came to the gameplay, actually, to think about how could it do it in the narrow space.
Yeah, I realized that a board game could be very complicated. It could be very complicated rules and whatever, because you have endless time. You're just killing time sitting and working on the board game or board puzzles. That's the reason. But in a real-time game, everything should be as simple as possible. At least simpler than you have the stuff on the paper, on the paper version. You know.
Great.
Yes.
And now the thing is, did you notice, or how did it start to spread and to become famous?
Well, you know, that time we didn't have any serious software industry in the country, and the only way to distribute software was just a copying. So you wrote the program, you give it to your friend copy it to his friend, and so on. so we didn't know any other way to to do it. It was no, well, all the computer wasn't available for selling, so it was the all the computers stay in the offices. So basically, it was not possible to buy any software. It such a category as a software product did not exist. We just wrote the program and exchanged them. So, and when my Tetris start working, I put the score, I put small decorations, uh, you know, it's amazing. But that time, my very serious concern of mine was that people will blame me that that I am giving them the wrong pieces, because I feel myself that I am giving myself the wrong pieces. but I knew out of the program that it was absolutely random, you know. So that's why I decorate the screen with some kind of small statistical stuff. So I put all the pieces and put how many times this piece appears. For nobody blame me that I never give the sticks. You know?
And how you got the idea to make the preview window, because that was also in the first version of the game I saw.
Yeah. So yes, I put when I put all those decorations, finally I decide that I'm done with this game, and I just copy it to my friend. So the game just go around like a wood fire, you know. So everywhere when I have when the Electronica 60 stays, or whatever compatible computer there, Tetris run there. So I decide that it's probably a good game, and I saw the other games and I could compare, and I feel that Tetris is well, stay in a row with the other game like Pac-Man, Q*bert, and the other game which was famous that time. And I decide that it's time to kind of convert it to PC. But that time I didn't have PC in my disposal, and I didn't work on PC. I didn't know this processor. I didn't know the operating system. Nothing. So in order to convert the game, I need some help, and it was Vadim Gerasimov who helped me to convert Tetris to PC. It was an interesting story too. So he was a schoolboy. He was 16 years old that time, and he came to the summer practice to computer center. And he became he was absolutely genius with the programming. He immediately get everything about operating system. He knew every bit of it, and the solid academical kind of people come for him to consult about some questions and whatever. But he wasn't even he was schoolboy, you know, that time. And his mentor kind of who was my friend, he kind of introduce us to each other and recommend him to me to help me with the specifics of PC. And we start working, and I was and I was really impressed with his ability at his very first task, because, you know, that time PC and my computer was kind of totally different world. They have nothing in common, kind of literally nothing. The floppy disk didn't read. They have different formats, and I have no idea how I could convert my program, which, well, was pretty solid already for that time, you know, into the computer. And he somehow he managed in couple days just be able to read my floppy disk on PC and get all my Pascal language text into PC, and that was very impressive because I I plan to kind of retype it again or something like that. So kind of really big stuff, but he did it like that, you know.
Great.
So and we worked together. So Pascal was kind of universal language, so it wasn't too hard to start running the program. So in couple days it started working at PC as my very original alphanumeric kind of version. But there was several kind of serious technical stuff. I want my game. My game was pretty quick for that time. For that time, and the speed, and it was kind of close to the limit of the computer ability. And computer were very different that time. So basically, if I want the game to be kind of standard for everybody, I need to take care about the real timing, exposing the piece and the real time of the reaction and the speed of the movement, everything. At that time at computer it was very new task, and even now the latency is kind of problem for the games. But I faced this latency with the natural speed of the processor of that time, and real speed of the imaging on the screen and everything. So we need to calibrate the computer, the processor. We need to set up the very correct speed, and I didn't need to do it on my computer or in my first version, but we did very correct work on PC as well. So this is just one of technical. There were several other similar problems, like a chipset was very different, and so we need to have consistent images on every computer. Another word in maybe we work about 6 months on this PC version. Obviously, it was spare time when we did our main kind of job all the time. But occasionally we came back and just doing it. Just did it, yes.
We're planning to release it for the public, and also the interesting thing is, what we learn now is that it's not unfair from the amount of each figure, because when you ask players of Tetris, they will always wait for that long bar to come up, so you can finally make a row. Like people, like many players, they make a vertically space, and they are waiting for the long I symbol, and it never comes. It's like, damn, it never comes. What did the coder do there?
Yes.
Nasty. So we learned you actually made a formula to make sure that it's always fair, even though to the player it's not.
Absolutely, yes, every time. Well, I can say that we plan, but we work on the game, and game is a program, and we want our program to be perfect and work everywhere. So that was the moment of professional honor, if you wish. So, and one day somebody come and say, your game doesn't work on, I don't know, some kind of very strange kind of video controller. So we need to be sure that we could recognize this Hercules controller and
Hercules card.
and make it work or something like that. Yeah. So basically, we did this job, and after that, the game, after we release, we give it up, we copy it to our friends at some moment when we feel the version is good, and then it starts spreading all over the world as well. So very soon we start getting the no, some kind of rumors of feedback from Eastern European country that Tetris is very popular there, and after that from West as well. And at one moment we get the proposal to license the game for selling from Robert Stein from Andromeda Software. And then it was the beginning of other life of Tetris.
How did that start, actually? How did you get the offer?
He just well, when we put our PC version together, we put that it's done in a computer center of Academy of Science, and one day computer center received a fax from Robert Stein proposing the licensing of the game, and then I start my really hard work to find a way to license it out because you know that was Soviet Union, and all the relationship between Russians and the other and the rest of the world was under control, under serious control. So everything was prohibited. Even my computer center has no right to trade anything. We need to use the special agencies who actually develop all the contracts and the relationship with the foreign countries. So I need to find these agencies, and I spent about 3 years trying to do it. Well, it wasn't my main job, and it's not only stuff I did that time, but yes, I did look for agency. Finally, I find this Electronorg Technica org who agrees to help us. And they were very busy as well, so that was their very low priority task as well. So it took very good 4 years before the very first agreement was even drafted. You know. Yeah.
If I remember correctly, the story goes like that there was also a thought of you, like how to do it with the license, with the selling from the government, and I think you said you decided to not fight for it.
Actually, yes. Everybody asked me why I didn't do it individually. It was a kind of very gray area, kind of. From the legal standpoint, because some author rights exist and whatever. So, but generally, I realized that either I kind of spend the rest of my life to fighting for my rights, either I become a very good publisher, which well, the author who could publish. Who would publish game, and I have in mind my other games which I wrote already, you know, and I decide that it's better to have people cooperating with me rather than fighting, and that's why I signed off my right for Tetris to my computer center for 10 years. And then Computer Center helped me, and Elorg helped me, and finally we got the game published, and that's what people remember now.
And what was the role of Stein in this moment?
Stein was the first professional agent in game industry who saw and appreciated the game. He was a Hungarian origin, and he lived in London and has his company there in Britain. But he has his old connection in Hungary, and he has some people there, some programmer there working for him. And one day he came there to Budapest, and he saw Tetris there, and he loved the game and decided that it is a reason to publish it. And he addressed to us, and after a while, he finally got the license for PC.
So actually, it came from Russia to Europe over Hungary.
Well, Hungary, Bulgaria, Poland at the same time. It's just getting there with who knows who knows how. Just
only friends like, hey, I've got a game for you from Russia.
Yes.
Should I copy you the disc and send you by post or something?
Yeah, that's what people did that time. Absolutely. It was PC only at the beginning, and PC was kind of expensive machine, expensive computer, and I don't think it was in a homes. Mainly professionals use it that time, you know.
So you mean it was more like an office game at work or something?
Yeah, maybe office game, yeah.
Like lunch break, time killer or something?
Absolutely, yeah. The first version was published. All of them has a boss key. You know the key you push, and on your screen is hidden under some kind of strange spreadsheet, something like that.
You really put a lot of effort into gameplay, into converting it. And also make sure that if the boss is behind somebody while at work,
yeah, I thought about it, but it wasn't my stuff. So the first publisher made it, not myself.
Okay, that was a feature. It was a feature he added. Okay, great. Now the thing is, you planned it like that, and did you know at this time that you would actually become famous and make some money out of it? You were giving the rights to the government for 10 years, but you didn't know what would happen after.
Nobody think about the game for such a long time at that time, but I had some hopes. I didn't understand why game should die. Computer didn't change that dramatically, well, computer did change dramatically, but people's mind don't, you know. So why people enjoy the game today and won't enjoy it tomorrow? It's not clear for me. It wasn't clear for me. So, and 10 years looks like a endless time, and everybody were happy with it. So that's how it worked.
Did you actually know back then that it would be loved by all ages, young, old?
Well, you never know anything about future, you know. I had some expectation that probably later it would be, it still will be alive, but I didn't expect the game to live that long. That's true.
Interesting. And now the thing is, how did it happen that the transformation from Stein to, I think it was Hank Rogers who approached you?
So basically when game was published at PC first, everybody wants it to be spread on the other platforms. And many people start hunting for it and come for us for the rights of the other on the other platforms, and including Stein as well. But he didn't do his job very well. So our agency wasn't glad, wasn't happy with him. He didn't pay in time and some other stuff. So basically we decided to look for the other publisher for the other platform. And when Hank came and talked to the agency, kind of everybody loves him as a publisher because he was a publisher of PC version in Japan. He put Tetris on every Japanese computer. He sub-licensed the rights and from Stein and did it.
Okay.
And then he came to purchase handheld rights. He knew about Game Boy that is close to IPR, and he really wants the right for the Game Boy. But that time he published the game on video platform as well, but by mistake, because it was a very big confusion about video rights that time, and he purchased the right which we didn't give that time, and we need to resolve this confusion. And we successfully resolved it at some time, and Nintendo came and purchased the video rights. That was all the detective story about Tetris rights in the end of 80s and beginning of 90s.
Wow, you even had lawsuits about it.
Oh yeah, which was described in the book of David Sheff called Game Over.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so and that story was told many times. You could read it.
Actually, what I have here is the NES version of Tetris and an NES clone. And maybe we could have a look because it was released at the same time like the Game Boy version.
Oh yeah, that was the BPS's publisher. Yes. It's an NES version. It's Nintendo. Oh, I got it. Yeah, sometimes I confuse NES and then NEC. NEC was the main PC platform in Japan that time.
I know it was a Famicom in Japan actually.
Yeah, Famicom in Japan and then NEC in 8-bit.
Yes, 8-bit exactly. Yeah. So what we have here is the 3-in-1 cartridge that actually came with the NES back then in Germany.
Oh, I see.
So
I didn't know.
okay.
Yeah, and my name is misspelled or spelled in the Russian way. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the classic music.
That's Tchaikovsky.
Yeah, you use folk songs, right?
Yeah, well, I did. My publisher did. Yeah.
Yes, because your versions didn't have music.
Yeah, and you see, by my tradition, they have statistics on the screen to be sure that that long piece is not special. It's as frequent as the other one. Yeah.
So this is actually very close to the Russian original, right?
Yes, it's very close, and and they show me the version, making sure that it's close, and I kind of approved it. Yes.
And what
is it you playing or it's demo mode?
No, it's me playing.
Okay, you're doing good. You're doing good.
Yeah, I did practice yesterday.
Yes.
So let me ask you something. The thing that is very famous and liked about the NES and the Game Boy version, which you can play via link cable via 2 players, that you can actually vanish more than one line. You can fill more than one line, and then that lines are appearing on the other person's screen. Was it in the Russian version too that you could
no,
Still more online?
we didn't have. I didn't make any two-player version here at all. I didn't work on that at all. So my version of Tetris was absolutely solitaire game. and uh, uh, and later on, so kind of exchange the line. It was a very natural way to organize the communication between the player, and I think it's still the only way we could imagine two-player game is structured or organized.
So when you sold all the publishing rights to Nintendo, you still had a hand in the game design in all versions.
Well, the people consult with me, and sometimes they get my approval for the version. Yes, I was involved.
Okay, now I lost.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's okay. That's okay. You not get used to the user interface. You are forced to play with your other hand.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that.
Okay. So actually, what is interesting is that for the European people, apart from the IBM version, um, the Game Boy and NES versions weren't the first ones. It was actually the Commodore 64 version.
Uh, well, maybe in some European country that was the that was the fact. I know that the original license was for PC separately and for all home computer like Commodore, Sinclair, and the other home computer was the other license, and it was distributed in United States on PC and on the home computers in Europe, and then versa versa, little bit later. Yes, that the Maxwell Communication has the company for publishing game software. It was Spectrum Holobyte in United States and MirrorSoft in Europe. So both belong to Maxwell, and he structured the deal the way he feel comfortable. We didn't have the influence on it.
So let me ask you, how did you communicate to allow changes or well adjustments to the gameplay? Because interesting thing is, for example, there's a long debate about the continuously rotation of the figures, because some versions they constantly drop and others have endless rotation, and then you just press the button down to let it fall, and there's a lot of well, you could say war against
Yeah.
against all the versions. What is better, what is more fair, and what makes the game too easy?
I see, I see. Well, well, I have my own version, which has no such problem at all, and I described it. And the first PC version was very accurate. The version published by Spectrum Holobyte. They did reverse engineering of my version, and they reproduce everything about the small detail in rotations and delays for locking very carefully. Well, the other computers was relatively weak at that time, and probably they couldn't do the very good job on it. So, but those versions those versions didn't live very long. So 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 that was just commercial stuff.
Interesting. So what some people do know, and but not all, is you actually made a 3D version called Beltris too.
Yes, that was in 90, I believe. Uh, that time that was a kind of ripoff of Tetris called Block Out, the real 3D version, which tried to put to put the pieces, the 3D pieces inside the kind of well, you know. And that was really, really boring and complicated game because the 3D shapes was made mainframe and you barely recognize them, and it was and people don't operate very well with the 3D on the 2D screens, you know. So basically, I look at this version. I didn't like it at all, and I decide that I know how to do it in 3D. And basically, Weltris is you play actually on the walls of the well, and
On the grid.
on, on the grid on the walls of the well, 3D well. So basically, you have a very strong feeling that you play 3D, but you still manipulate with 2D images, with the flat stuff. And I think it's basically, you know, Weltris was one of the top 10 in 1990, but Blockout wasn't. So I think I won.
So actually, Blockout was kind of first and a copy of the Tetris idea, and
Yeah,
then you
so,
said, "Oh, let's do my own version. I can do it better." Was it like that actually?
I don't know. I just saw the version, and that was a rip-off of Tetris, obviously. But somebody put some efforts to put it and try, and that's
Great,
fine, I think.
great. So
Yeah,
it was of
but
your advantage actually.
yeah, but I decide, but I try to prove that it should be thought very carefully, and basically, you know, Weltris was very popular for a short time in Japan for arcade machines. Four people play four walls against each other, and that was a very fun game. I saw it in Japan. Amazing. Yeah.
Should we have a look at it? I have the C64 version for it.
Oh, really? Yeah. So basically, it was four wall of the well going deep, and you could move the pieces. You could rotate the pieces as you rotated in Tetris, but you could move them along the walls around the stuff, and when it comes to the bottom, they stay on the bottom at the very last portion. The problem with this stuff is basically if the pieces on top and the pieces on the bottom, you have kind of counterintuitive interface. Sometimes you push left button in order to put to move the piece to the right when it's on top or on the bottom. So it's kind of controversy of the movement. So this game should be played with the wheel, you know, to rotate the piece around around the well. Yeah, yeah. So, but with no wheel, it's kind of difficult.
So you had the arcade machine actually had a wheel, you say, or
No, 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 no. It was the arcade machine has four player, and everybody has the local wall to play.
mm,
It was like a for Tetris,
hmm
and the pieces meeting on the bottom.
I see.
That was the idea. And probably you could probably take the your neighbor place as well. So it was kind of interesting arrangement for multiplayer Tetris.
So what did actually come after Valtris? I remember you did some other successful variants like Yoshi's Cookie for Game Boy,
Yes,
and
yeah, I did participate in Yoshi's Cookie. I did the puzzle mode for it. It wasn't my game originally. Main mechanics was of somebody else. But they asked me to work on the puzzle mode, and I put together several puzzles for it. Yeah, Yoshi's Cookie, I did work on it. Later on, we published on PC a very strange kind of game called Elfish, Electronic Fish. It was kind of the attempt to do very aesthetic stuff. So basically, it was the tool to arrange the aquarium on your PC and put the alive fish and seaweeds and all the decorations. And you could breed the fish you really want. We have some kind of interesting genetic mechanism to make kind of alive fishes there.
Something like a Tamagotchi, but in a fishbowl.
Yeah, it was kind of it was published by Maxis, who likes all kind of simulation. So
Sims,
simulation of aquarium, yes.
Sims, SimCity, and this stuff.
Yeah, they do this. They do more sophisticated simulations, so that they kind of love our concept of the tank, and that was for that level of hardware, it was really advantage stuff to do because we reproduce real 3D on 2D screen with no serious rendering processors at that time, 386.
So in
Yeah.
many projects you were involved with, also Tetris, you always push the hardware to its limits.
Kind of, yeah. Well, from another hand, programmers are very happy to work with me because I never ask them to program something really crazy and undoable.
Okay.
Because I was myself a programmer. I wrote a lot of code, and I know, and my mind works the way to simplify the work for programmers. So yes, I sometimes I try to push, sometimes not. It really depends on the project in mind. Then I enter Microsoft, and I did lots of games there.
Also Tetris variants and stuff.
No, no, not really Tetris variants, but I had it was a puzzle collection at Microsoft, which was bundled for a while with some PCs, and we have 10 different puzzle games, all original, and four of them was mine games. Later on, I did work a lot on the big game called Pandora's Box for visual puzzles, and that was my one of my favorite works because I have 10 puzzles, not very logical, but mostly based on the images, like jigsaw puzzles or something like that. But all the game was original. It was a good title. I could probably show it to you. I have a
Great,
poster on
great,
my wall, the red one. It's from Pandora's box.
great.
Yes. Yeah. So it was break even. So it was sold about 100,000 copies. Not bad for pretty heavy title. And later on, I did a lot of projects. I participated in many projects for Xbox, but it wasn't my main platform because it was more for hardcore player, and I'm in puzzles. I like all the puzzle stuff. But I did the game which were pretty successful there, called Hexic, and it was published kind of twice on online and on Xbox as well.
So you didn't only do Tetris. So
Oh no, no, I did work on many other titles as well.
so how is it for you? Was it was it interesting to work on the other things too, or were you more happy to be involved into Tetris projects or things that were at least like Tetris, or were you appreciating the chance to try something like the fishbowl, which was totally different from what you used to do?
Yeah, well, well, I like Tetris. I still play it, and I love the game. And I'm always enjoy when I saw new version, or if it is some work kind of related to Tetris. I do it with my pleasure. But it's just a job. I would never do it voluntarily, you know. But it's a very agreeable job. Well, I and the other title, that's what come to my mind, and I want to do it. And I originally I start coding this stuff. Now I ask my friends programmer to do me a prototype, and then we see how it works.
You're not coding yourself anymore.
No. I'm too aged for it already. One time you lose it, you never pick it up again.
Okay.
So I stopped programming maybe about 15 years ago, and once you drop it, it's really hard to restart. Unfortunately, yeah, that's a very unique job.
But your job with Tetris doesn't stop here. If I'm correctly, the latest project you worked with was Electronic Arts publishing it with Electronic Arts on Android and iOS, and there were like 150 million copies sold on smartphones alone.
Well, I can say that I was very actively involved in it. They just show me the very ready versions, and all they need is kind of approval. But it was a good version, so it was okay. Yeah, but basically my involvement is we have licensing. When we license the game, they need to fit our requirements. So in every licensing agreement, it is a clause about the approval. So we look at their kind of early version, and say what to change in order to fit the standard of Tetris. We maintain the brand very carefully, and
So
that's my job, and that's part of my work. Yes.
so whenever there's a Tetris version out that is licensed, it will have a certain quality.
Well, yes. So many people propose something new, and we are okay with it as soon as the standard version is included. You know.
You once said in an interview there are 11 versions of Tetris. Now, what interests me, how did you make those different versions of Tetris? I mean, if you think about it at the first sight, it doesn't really seem like you can make a lot of variants about of such a game.
Well. First of all, people try different things with the game. The core mechanics, the pieces. Sometimes they try to add another piece, and that's kind of dramatically changed the game. The most successful attempt was to adding the single piece, which kind of appears very rarely, but fill up very important gaps on the screen. Just Mino, not Tetramino, but one Mino. Yeah. Or this Mina has some kind of special properties. That's what people do. Sometimes people try to do something with the lines, with the collapsing of the lines. The very first diversion of Tetris was the game called Bombliss. It came just in time of the first Tetris in 91 or 92, and it was the bombs embedded into the pieces, and when the bomb kind of come together on the field, if you arrange several pieces with the bombs close to each other, the bomb explodes, and instead of collapsing line, it make a big hole in the screen, in the garbage of the screen. Was interesting, a little bit random, but not as effective as line collapsing, but interesting version. Sometimes people do the Tetris when that kind of feels down, when the line collapsed, the remainder in my original version remain frozen. But sometimes they try to put some rules for them for this garbage to fall down, and those versions there are a different way to do it. It simplifies the game and make the cascade of the lines happen, and those cascade could be very long. So some people like to try it, but again, I personally don't like it very much because it's really hard to predict what's happened after the line collapsing. It's just a random reward for you, you know.
So you
So
make sure
so
it's fair.
so well, what means fair? Yes, it's fair because everybody who plays this version receives the same stuff, you know. Yeah, and lots of extra rules in Tetris are coming with the two-player version or multiplayer version because they need extra stuff while they play and communicate each other. So make harm to each other or help each other, whatever, you know. So those rules as well. That's why it's probably 11 or more version of Tetris, which kind of known for this day.
What's your favorite version?
Uh, out of what I played recently, I still well I still like very much the original Game Boy version. So everything there was done very good, and somehow I played a lot that version, and I really like it. We have so-called Tetris Zone, some site which provide the more or less standard Tetris game, and the game there is very similar to this Game Boy version. So that's what I play usually. Tetris from Tetris Zone.
So so actually, are you still playing your Tetris on the real old systems, or are you using an emulator nowadays? If you say it's your favorite version.
Uh, yeah, mostly emulator. So when I come back, yes, I do use the emulators. Yes.
So what also would interest me, what are your next plans for Tetris? I mean, now we have the smartphone stuff, but what is coming after? What is in your mind? What would you like to do this year?
Well, we have pretty solid version with the iPhone, mobile version with the touch. It's a good, very solid and interesting version, but I think it needs some improvement, and this improvement is coming. I think basically my dream is to make Tetris as a first electronic sports. I want to create some kind of very standard version which could be played by professionals and amateurs and everybody to compete to each other.
So you mean like professional esports, like we have nowadays for Viva Soccer or whatever game. So you would like to make a standard version for Tetris for
Yeah,
professional gamers.
yeah, that's my dream. I can do it myself because it's a lot of work and whatever. But that's our plans, and we try to work on this version, and it should be maybe more simple version, and it should be the version with some with some extra stuff in order to compete, because the sport is competition and people should compete. And all the two-player and multiplayer Tetris, they are better or worse, but I don't think that the really great version of multiplayer Tetris is there yet.
What would you make different if it's not a secret?
Well, one of the problem I noticed that Tetris for the serious players is a very kind of intensive game. When you play on the high speed, it takes all your resources to just maintain the pieces and place it and whatever. And that's why you are very concentrated on your own play field, and you don't have real resources to see what your opponent doing. So it's no real communication between the players, because everyone is really kind of swamping in their own play field. So that's the problem for multiplayer game Tetris, for multiplayer Tetris. And how to solve it, I don't know yet. So I don't want to really spoil the game itself, make it simpler or more slow, because the excitement comes from the speed and good manipulation. Yeah, but maybe it should be find some kind of good compromise should be found for people to be able to really care about their opponents or in the game, not just about themselves. So as soon as I come up with something, it will be new multiplayer Tetris.
How about a co-op or team mode that, like, you would have
That's
two teams
yeah,
playing
that's
against
what
each other?
that's what I like. Yes, I think that might be some solution. So one player is kind of driver and the other one is navigator, who kind of strategically decide what to do. But you know, in order to introduce such a game, when you need kind of really multiplayer kind of teams to start competing, it's really complicated organized kind of structural.
Of course.
So that would be so it seems that this way is a very promising, but that's a very hard way, unfortunately. What we exploiting it itself as well. Yes.
It's actually interesting that you are considering to create an e-gaming, e-sport version of Tetris, because in the past interviews you always said that Tetris is about having fun, but very serious esports players are actually doing it for a living. I mean, those who are really good. So how did you get your interest into esports, and how does this fit?
Well, esports. Well, every sport is fun. Well, besides profession, it's always fun, and I think that Tetris is very useful game. I mean, it really stimulates people's brain. It's really improve your spatial kind of vision and whatever. And well, and it has some therapeutic kind of value as well, as we know. You know. Well, some research say that Tetris is very useful in some kind of post-traumatic stress kind of treatment as well.
So it's not
Yeah,
only for education; it's also used in a medical way. So
yeah. Well, it was the research which shows that it's very useful for it might be used for some post-traumatic treatment.
great.
Yeah, it was an article, and we met these people in Oxford who made this research. Yes, it was very interesting.
so what we learn from here is Tetris is very, very flexible and can be used in very much ways.
Yes, exactly. So basically, if Tetris become really popular way to compete between the people, and this is not boxing, it's very peaceful competition, you know. So I think it would be very good. And the professional sport always kind of grows up and exists on top of the real popularity of the game and involvement of many people, of many amateur, and this is great.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So what is also interesting is a lot of people have the opinion that you did history for Russia with that game. A lot of people connect Tetris with Russia. They're like, "Oh, Russia."
Well,
So, do you consider yourself famous, or that you did something important for history of Russia, or for your country at
well,
all? How do you
well,
see
I,
yourself?
I think that my glory or famous is very exaggerated. The professionals, the people who involved in IT or computers, programmers, they definitely know me and remember my name and understand it. But the general population don't give a shit about me. I'm pretty sure, you know. So, so basically, that's the situation. And well, it's a good that Tetris. I created the game when I was in Russia, and it's good that it looks like a Russian game. But I don't feel it's a Russian game. It's an absolutely international game for a while already. But the Russian songs are there, and it's a very good spirit. I have nothing against it, and I think it's funny and
Was
good.
that your idea actually to use Russian folk songs?
No, it was the first version which were published. They all have the Russian churches, the Russian matryoshkas, and all other attribute of the Russian folk cultures, including the songs, and then it becomes kind of tradition.
So let me ask you one question that really interests me. You did a lot of judging rules for competitions and events where gamers are developing games. Do you
Yeah.
think? Do you think? I mean, do you feel humbled to be in a jury voting what other programmers do?
Well, yeah, well, I feel I need to do it. I like to encourage the young people to work on the games, especially if they are talented, and I always fight for the talented kind of students or participants for their title to be somehow nominated or prized. So I feel that's important thing to do, and I do it with pleasure.
Did you ever consider to stop making Tetris games and participating in it, or are you this kind of person saying it's my love, I want to do this for
Well,
forever?
Well, it's my love. Basically, it's a job, and Tetris still deliver me some funds, and that's why I need to work on it, and I need to support it.
I hope you have a very good future this year, and I wish you a lot of success in your e-gaming plans. That's really very exciting to hear that you have so big plans with your game, and I'm pretty sure that the people who see this interview will be excited to see what you're coming up with for the next years.
Okay, thank you, George. That was a good interview, and
Thank you.
and I'm glad that I agreed to do it.